Today's reading comes from the book of John, chapter 6, verses 24 through 35. It's speaks to us about the bread from heaven. So when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they themselves got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal." Then they said to him, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him who he has sent." So they said to him, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe in you? What work are you performing? Our ancestor ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, 'He gave them bread from heaven to eat.'" Then Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." May the Lord bless this reading of his word.
There we go. For those who follow Jesus' main question for them at that moment when they appeared before him was, "Why are you looking? Is it because of the food in your belly, or is there a deeper reason?" And that's kind of the theme for this message today. Why are we looking as the children of God? Is it to be sustained physically or in some way, or is there deeper meaning to our search for spiritual truth and reality in our lives? At the beginning of my junior year in college, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I'd begun as a pre-law student, and for various reasons made the decision that that's not where I wanted to go. And then, of course, I had a part-time job, as I've told you before, as a milkman. So as I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer, I wondered if I would just rather be a milkman for the rest of my life, until I went home and told my father that, and he forbid me. So by my junior year, not knowing where I wanted to go, and I also kind of had this part-time job as a youth group director at a Presbyterian church, my first exposure to Presbyterianism. Not knowing where I wanted to go, and being a philosophy major, which if you don't know, being a philosophy major doesn't really get you a job out there on the street. I decided to fall back on the family business. And I went to seminary. Still not sure this is really the direction I wanted to go in, but I went. And I remember struggling with it my first year, struggling with who I was, why I was there, struggling with the fact I didn't want to be a Methodist anymore, and can I become a Presbyterian in the middle of this process? And I remember I sat down and shared all my woes with my academic advisor. And then he just looked at me and he said, "You know, Jeff, don't ask yourself what you want to be. Ask yourself why you're looking in the first place. Why are you here? Why aren't you a lawyer? Why aren't you a milkman? You know, it took a while for me to process that. But thinking about that question over and over in the next days and weeks and months, I came to know why, and I knew it was personal. It was very personal. And I had to examine my own personal journey. I knew I was in a state of flux. I knew I didn't know what I wanted to be. Because you see, I wasn't personally really connected to anything. My family of origin broke up through divorce my senior year in high school. And it just looked like everything blew apart. After graduating from college, all my college friends went to their careers and got married and went off to have their lives, and I didn't really feel connected to them like I had in college anymore. As I thought about those things, and there are things you have to do, it's a self-examination. The why question became answerable very easily. I knew why. I knew why. I needed connection. I needed to find that place where relationship made sense to me. I needed to find that place where I felt like I was part of something that was bigger than I was, and I hadn't found it yet. Today's passage from John is the postscript to the feeding of the 5,000. You know, that great miracle where Jesus feeds all these people on the hillside with just a couple of loaves of bread and some fish. And after that big event, Jesus got in the boat and he crossed Galilee. And some of those who'd been fed on the hillside went around the lake to meet him on the other side. And that's when Jesus asked them what they were there for. Why are you looking? Are you here just for the food that I put in your stomachs? Or is there a deeper reason why you are here? And he went on to tell them that it was more than just the food he gave them, that they had bothered to come. There were 5,000 being fed, but less than that came around the lake to find Jesus again, and they were looking for something deeper. And they responded by asking him, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" And this was their "why are you looking" moment. They knew that they were there for more than just food. They were looking for connection. They were looking for belonging. They were looking for something that made sense in a world that no longer made sense. It was no longer the Israel of their ancestors' upbringing. It was an occupied nation by the Romans, where they really had no freedom and they were under the thumb of Caesar. And nothing made sense anymore. And they were looking for more. They were looking for that sense of belonging that perhaps they'd never had in their lives. And it wasn't just food that Jesus had given them on those hills along the Galilee. It was an understanding that there's something bigger than this, that we're part of a greater picture, and we want to know more. Back when I served up in Columbus, Ohio at the church there, wasn't very long, I was in the office as the head of staff and realized that all the churches along this very well-to-do community of Worthington, all the churches along the main drag were locked up tight. You couldn't get in unless you hit a buzzer and they identified you through the camera and let you in the building. And that was true not just of our church, but all the churches on the street. And one of the things that a lot of people, there were people who recognized this, but a lot of people didn't recognize and wouldn't admit, actually, was there were a lot of homeless people on the street out there. But they never got noticed. They kind of hid, and most people didn't notice them, but they would come, and they'd buzz on the buzzer at the church, and they'd go from church to church to church, and they'd be told to go away. And that was true about the church that I had just come to serve. And I told the staff, there was a rule that they weren't allowed in, and it was pretty much all day long a staff of women, and for safety reasons that makes sense. But I told them, when I'm in the building, if a street person, a homeless person buzzes to come, you call me, and I'll come downstairs, and I will go out and meet them. And I would. And in that way, we started a Deacons Fund. We began to help people. And I remember when Sammy first started coming, and I went down to the door, and there was Sammy, and I let him in, and we sat down in the fellowship hall, and we talked. And of course, predictably, Sammy needed some cash. And we talked about that, and I got him some cash for what he said he needed. And he would come back occasionally, and I'd help him again. And one day he came, and we sat down, and I said, Sammy, I really don't have money for you today, but if you want a cup of coffee and you just want to talk, I'm here. Well, at first it took him aback. Probably no one ever said to him, you just want to sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk? He'd be glad to do that. And I'm sure that was new to him. But he stayed. That's what we did. We sat down, we had a cup of coffee, we talked. He told me about his life. Then after that visit, he would come by, and yes, sometimes he asked for money, and yes, sometimes I gave it to him, but sometimes he began himself saying to me he didn't need any money today. He just wanted a cup of coffee and talk. And Sammy and I would sit and have a cup of coffee and talk, and it would be relationship. Little did he know, and little did I know when he first came to that door the first time to ask for money that we would wind up having a relationship where we'd sit down and have coffee and talk. And I think after a while, in those years that I was there, he knew that I thought that he was more than a guy who just wanted money. Jesus helped those people who bothered to come across the lake to find him, to let them know that they were more than just, he was more about just food in their stomachs. They were asking deeper questions, and Jesus recognized that. And so he continued to push and prod and ask them why they were looking. And their response to Jesus was so powerful. Sir, give us this bread always, the spiritual bread, the bread that gives us deeper meaning. So my academic advisor asked me that question, and after a few weeks of pondering, I came to understand that yes, I too was being called into ministry. It was hard for me to believe. I never expected it. I swore as a minister's son I'd never do this my whole life. But yes, I began to realize that. It was through a conversation asking me why I was looking. Understand that first. This is where Jesus took the people who came across the lake to follow him after being fed. As I said, the whole 5,000 didn't show up, just those who were beginning to understand why they were looking for him. Friends, that's where faith begins. That's where faith grows. That's where faith blossoms. That's where faith leads us to the place at any point, at any stage in our lives. That's where faith leads us to understand. When we bother to ask ourselves why we are looking at any given stage in life, it calls us to go deeper and to understand more completely how God leads us to be in relationship not only with God but with the children of God. It begins if we are brave enough to ask ourselves, why are we looking in the first place? That's personal. That is where faith begins. And Christ has the answer. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Friends, at any given point in our lives, let us never stop asking why we are looking. Because just like those folks who came across Galilee to see Jesus again, the answer to that question is always a new one. And it takes us to a new and exciting place. Amen. Let us stand and say what we believe.